Maybe a little, you don't want that. You don't want that. You don't want that.
I don't think it's.
Okay, welcome back. Okay, welcome back here for panel 4. The lunch panel. So. That was really wonderful. We're gonna step back from the politics of women's football and talk about empowering girls and women in sport and in football. I'm Sarah Zip. You probably are familiar with that by now. So if you get confused by all the Sarahs, I'm the Zip one. You can just call me that. We have a wonderful panel here today with a wonderful addition, a new addition not seen on your schedule, and that's Gwen Zip, and she's here to give us the perspective of young people in sport. So to start things off, and we have Helen Hardy on Zoom on wait. So if she manages, we had a bit of a time mix up. So if she manages to get on, we'll bring her on. But in the meantime, we'll get forward with the group that we have here in person. So just to start off, it's lunch hour, let's have a little fun. I thought, we'll just do a quick introduction and then tell us something surprising about yourself. So, yeah, here we go. Fun icebreakers. So, I'll kick it off. So I'm Sarah Zip. I'm at Mount St. Mary's University. I'm also the director for Power to Play Period, which is my project to educate coaches on menstruation and sport for girls. And the surprising thing is, even though I would proudly consider myself a radical feminist, I have the musical preferences of an old white dude. Like give me your Billy Joels and your Bruce Springsteens and your James Taylors. So that's a surprising fact about me. Gwen, your turn.
I'm Gwen, and I'm going into 9th grade, and my main sport is field hockey. And interesting fact, I've been vegetarian for 6 years.
I really don't know how to answer this question. I'm Poppy Sufiliado from the university. As I mentioned earlier, I work in the sports management degree, and I specialize in managing high performance sport and sport development pathways. I think what was the question again? What's different or what's
Something
surprising about me
that we might not expect from you.
Okay. I was an elite athlete in sailing. So I was representing Greece, where I'm originally from, in regattas across the world. And in fact, I qualified for the 1992 Olympics in Spain. And I didn't get to go. But why is the better question? And this is where it gets interesting. My story gets interesting. Because I was sailing and representing a very small rural sailing club, my hometown. And the biggest club from Greece in Athens, the crew from that club was second after me in the category of 470s, which is an Olympic category. And what happened was the president of that big, rich club literally bought out my place. So what they did was they offered my president a new sailing boat to change positions. And I had no idea, myself, and I was the captain, and I had a crew. We had no idea this boat rocks up on our club, and we think, oh, how generous of the federation to give us a boat. But the boat wasn't from the federation, and it wasn't for me. It was for the president's niece. long story short, I didn't get to go to the Olympics, and perhaps for the better, because I took a completely different pathway, and instead of becoming a coach in sailing, I ended up being an academic, and as boring as it may sound, being an academic, I absolutely adore and love my journey and my career and my role and the impact that it has in the sport industry. So that's me. Long.
Thank you, everyone. Hope you're enjoying your lunch. I just started eating a week, just started eating.
We'll go hungry.
We're hungry. So my name is Raj Vilaytham. From Macquarie University. I'm a sociologist, and my field of research is primarily migration, ethnic race relations, and multiculturalism. In recent years, I've delved a bit into informal sport. And currently I've got a Australian Research Council discovery grant looking at informal sport, social resilience, and public spaces. So it was glad I was very happy the previous panel actually talked about pickup sport, or the kind of spontaneous, non-organized participation of team sport in the backyard or in the public park. So hopefully I get to say a bit more about that. So that's the current project that I'm working in. I've also got a young daughter who has been playing community or organized sport for the last 10 years. And that also has given me quite an interesting perspective as a migrant myself to come to learn about how the organizations and structures work here in terms of organized sport participation. So I'm happy to share that too. Something surprising about me, difficult one, but I'm thoroughly right-handed and right-footed, but I can shoot well on my left. And I've scored some goals over the years. That's it.
Hi, I'm Tanya Evans. I'm a historian, also at Macquarie University, and we've had many a conversation about sport. I'm mainly an historian of the family history, and how people use stories itself, use history and stories itself. And I turned to the history of sport when I wrote a community history of my local swimming club a few years ago. And after that, I was asked by the State Library of New South Wales to collect oral history interviews with a range of female athletes across New South Wales. And I interviewed Kate Gill for that. And what I'm particularly interested in is how stories of female athletic success make an impact on ordinary everyday women. And the surprising story about me, I took up CrossFit a few years ago, and I think that more people need to take up CrossFit in middle age, particularly gymnastics. Thank you.
Excellent. Wow, what an interesting panel we had today. Okay. Just to kick things around, to kick things off, I wanted to just ask sort of a general question to the group, to talk about what you have recognized as both barriers to, pathways to empowering girls and women, and what are the corresponding facilitators that would help girls and women progress on their pathway in sport. And to put this in context for you, Gwen, can you tell us maybe something about some of the barriers or challenges that you face and how you think you would like to see things change?
Okay, so I finished my first track season, and one of the main things that was really annoying was the uniforms, and it was okay, and it said I talked to the coaches about this, and they said it was unisex, but it was actually just unisex but boys. And so it was so uncomfortable to wear, and especially do running in, because I did 400 and stuff, and it was so uncomfortable, and I would just like to have the option of unisex that's actually unisex. And then they also had we had these tank top jersey things, which kind of showed the side of your bra, and I got told a lot of times oh, your bra showing. I don't think it wasn't made for me, so I can't do anything about that. And then I also, in field hockey, it's a skirt wearing sport. And so it was really annoying to play sports in a skirt, especially with like a stick, because it would always get caught and it would like actually interfere with the playing. And so like I just think that options for uniforms in sports would be like so much better. Yeah. Thank you.
Thanks, thank you for real life experiences of a young girl who's actually engaged and living and breathing those situations. There's been a lot of ideas floating throughout this conference with relation to barriers, be it economic barriers, accessibility barriers, all sorts of things. And one thing that I'd like to add to this list of barriers is influencers and social media and word of mouth, and how that trifecta has a huge impact on how girls perceive sports, specific sports, in general sports and physical activity. And I have a 17-year-old daughter who was doing a lot of gymnastics and ballet and cheerleading and all that. And when she hit that stage where social media kicks in and influences and word of mouth, which was about the age of 13, when they're allowed to have a social media account and phones and stuff, things changed. Self-awareness, body awareness, conversations with other girls at school, influences, and so forth. Long story short, where I see a lot of room for change is, okay, do girls use influencers to make a decision about what sport and if they're going to play sport? Well, let's use that to change the narrative. And if it is influencers and social media that shape the direction and the decision making for girls in sport, let's tap into that and use it the best possible way we can. And there's a lot around this, but I think we get the gist of the huge impact that makes.
Right, I think that's a great point, and I think we can come back around to this later, but for this generation, I think one of the things we're seeing is there is a different acceptance around body image, and I think it's a healthier one.
Yes,
So if you look
I
at the
agree.
models,
Yeah,
supermodels from like the 90s, you're gonna see a different body style that's very specific to a thin, white, heteronormative ideal, whereas now we have different body styles, more inclusive, and all giving different role models for girls to look up to.
it's impressive, and that whole body shaming, but there was a bit of a conversation in the earlier panel today. And I am really happily surprised how the conversation around bodies and what's acceptable and what not is changing, and how the new generation of kids is more open to different body shapes, different, and all sorts of other things, not just bodies, but yeah, absolutely see that happening.
But still difficult.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I think even from the previous panel and speakers now have sort of addressed a number of issues in regards to accessibility, obviously cost of participation in team sport or organized team sport is going annually, it's rising annually. And obviously there are also social cultural factors, particularly around new migrant communities who have not had that sort of involvement or ideas about getting girls and women involved in organized sport or other forms of sport. I think that's something will take over time. But one of the things I see through the work that I've been doing, focused on informal sport, is that this sort of spontaneous coming together of particularly people from migrant background, newly arrived refugees or newly settled refugees and asylum seekers, that informal sport offers this a sense of camaraderie, a sense of belonging. They don't have to, pay to play in this sort of sport. And there's lots, we've done a fair bit of scoping study across Sydney metropolitan area, and in many parts you see mostly men, and that's again another issue that was pointed out earlier about girls and women's participation in the golf sport is very rare, and partly because there's kind of cultural and inhibitions and so forth. But having said that, I've started to see some changes, particularly if you look at in the Southwest, some of the football clubs, just to name one, like Kimber Football Club, it's become extremely inclusive. There's a lot of girls and women in full hijab, meaning Muslim parents are actually sending their daughters or their child to play in those sports, which otherwise may not, be something that they would have imagined. So I guess, along with all this issues around accessibility and cultural and social inhibitions, having that know-how, I think, is quite important. I remember coming to Australia as a PhD student some 20 years ago. I didn't have any clue that such a thing as community sport actually operates in Australia. So I've come from India via Singapore. All we did was to just take a ball, go down to a common area under the block and play football. That was the kind of sport we got involved. And girls also played, was quite fairly acceptable. But coming to Australia, I didn't have any clue until I was introduced to organized sport through my PhD supervisor. And that led me to the Saturday men's sport. And I think, many of the newly arrived migrants don't have that kind of knowledge about how this sport is organized, particularly football. So maybe better education and promotion of that would be important.
I think we've heard some of that in previous sessions too, where we kind of know we've made it with girls in sport when they're spontaneously going out to the parks and playgrounds and playing at the same level that you'll see boys do the same sport.
So one of the things that was talked about yesterday and in the previous panel is about the lack of visibility of women in sport, but also the lack of storytelling of female sporting success. And the reason the State Library asked me to create an oral history archive of female athlete interviews, because there's no written archive, right? And this is what historians use to write histories of women's sport or men's sport or whatever. When I interviewed female athletes, many of them, different ages, races, generations, from many different backgrounds, talked about if you can't see it, you can't be it, right? And I think this is really important. And I think we have to analyze their stories to trace the structural advantages and disadvantages they have emerged through. And what's interesting with oral history is that they're often gendered. So and we often talk about cultural scripts in oral history. So there are many, many cultural scripts that structure males' response to sporting success. It's great to be successful if you're a man in sport. For women, they can be much more muted about that. So that kind of confidence in storytelling about individual sporting success isn't there and isn't part of the wider currency. And that's why I'm currently working with colleagues at Macquarie in Health and Human Sciences on a community sport project where we're trying to examine people's engagement with community sport. Why are they participating? What familial structures enable them? Childcare and domestic responsibilities often stop women from participating in sport. We know that from other elite sporting success as well. So I think it's a greater awareness of that means that people might become better aware of the inequalities within which they're admired.
We've heard a lot about that as well so far in the conference, on the relatability of women athletes, where you're Sam Kerr, you feel like you could know her, that she could be your neighbor, your sister, your friend. We don't necessarily get that feeling from, you know, Messi or some of the big footballers. So there's a power in that, and how are we using that to promote sport? I'm gonna open it up now, to some questions to the audience for any of our panelists. But, oh, sorry, yeah.
Could you please say, I find this fascinating, I think I was, used to be understand what you said, but I thought this thing about the narratives, to above all, the role models, glorification of the female superstar that is lacking. I find this, could you say more about this?
Because you think there are narratives of,
No, I mean,
because
but there, I assume, I assume that there probably aren't any, but I really found your point very interesting, how crucial this is. And above all, what in fact exists. I mean, I can't imagine that someone like Serena Williams, let's just take one, is not present to or gym, or, you know, skating stars or whatever. So I just wanted to follow.
so some people are definitely practiced at telling stories of their lives. And oral historians might undertake an interview differently than, say, a journalist might undertake an interview differently with an athlete. But oral historians across the board, no matter whether they're talking with athletes or anyone else, often recognize that interviewees' narratives are very specifically gendered. So women will often talk about their life stories in relationship to others, usually familial others, fathers, mothers, husbands, their children, right? Whereas men will frequently not necessarily talk about those issues, but talk about their professional, economic, sporting success, their individualized kind of categories, whereas women tend to be socialized in different ways. So, and those cultural scripts are very present in all sorts of storytelling about life stories.
You might have any data on how women athletes or women successful athletes, how are they represented in literature or in the public sphere as opposed to men?
I mean, there is some scholarship around that, and I'm currently doing this work on oral history interviews around that.
All right.
Native Romans, I'm sorry, no, I was thinking about how I could ask this, whether it's a question or a comment. And visualization and identification. And we saw this before the first Matildas game, when the news came out about Sam Kerr not being able to play, that the casual fan that knows the Matildas brand, because it's a very strong brand, it's still spoken about as the strongest sporting brand in Australia. The casual fan lost their connection to the team because the only individual that they're aware of in the team was Sam Kerr. I mean, if you're a football tragic, of course, you know the players, you know where they're playing, you know what they've done, etc. And I had this told to me by somebody before the Men's World Cup as well in Qatar, that one of the issues with the team cutting through to the Australian public was because people didn't know the team. People didn't know the players. And I think here at Women's World Cup, obviously there's an amazing opportunity, particularly now that they've been successful for football to empower the team to cut through, to build a brand and build knowledge of the players and who they are, and get to that human element where the stories and the narratives make that connection and keep that in our consciousness. But I'm just wondering, without that sporting success, and this is sort of, I'm not sure if it's a comment or a question, but I just like to hear thoughts. Without that sporting success, is it possible to actually cut through that narrative and build that, build that identity and help, help not just the hard on rusted on fans that are always going to know which player, what their favorite food is, their birthday, who their twin sister is, but the casual fan that knows the team, knows the brand,
help them identify more with the team. So I think it's more a question than a comment, more a comment than a question, but it'd be interesting in your thoughts about, do we need sporting success to also, sporting success to also be part of that narrative, or can you still build that as a Football Australia or as a club trying to, with your local community and build your team? Can you still do that without that success? And I'm interested in your thoughts.
Can I just add to that? Tanya, you were talking also about storytelling. I know some of the members of the panel and myself have watched the Matildas, The World at Our Feet, from Disney Plus, which told the stories in a very informed way. Now, the question is, of course, how wide-reaching is that?
Do you want to give it a go?
Okay.
So there's the team brand, and then there's the athlete brand, right? Let's stay with the athlete brand. It's a blend of brand identity, which is how the athlete sees themselves as a brand and what they stand for. And then there's the brand image, which is what the people, the public, the potential sponsors perceive the athlete brand to stand for. Now, in an ideal world, the brand identity would come together with the brand image, and you will have that beautiful congruence that helps the athlete use that place where your image and your identity overlap and develop your brand strategies in a successful way that will attract a lot of fans, a lot of sponsors, and so forth. Now, with this in as a bit of a knowledge, background knowledge, we have seen a lot of athletes that were not necessarily successful on field. An example, Maria Sharapova, she was a great tennis player, but as far as my recollection goes, she never won a tournament.
Anna Kournikova.
Yes, sorry, yes. Yes. Thank you. And yet, if you look at the lucrative deals that she had, they overcompensated for the money, the prize money that she made. And that's because she used that brand congruence, whatever that brand was, to her benefit. So I think moving on to this era where a lot of fans want to know about an athlete's personal everyday life, what they eat, how they train, are they sad today, are they spending time with their family, are they going to get married, are they going to have a baby? They want to know. Give it to them, right, in an authentic, genuine way that addresses their need to stay in touch with you. And this is where then we can go back to my other point about leveraging that social media and the influencers to change, reshape the narrative. So I think this is a very good point that you raised, James. That's my 5 cents on this.
Yeah, I think it's a very good question. I probably want to not look at it from an atomized way, as an individual player, and you've got your Matildas, your Wallabies, and blah blah blah. But all the national teams are already built on this foundation of being Australian, right? So the narrative, the national narrative of being a sporting nation, right? Giving the fair go and doing your best for the country, and that I guess sort of is pretty much filtered through all sporting codes, even to the swimmers and so forth. And maybe that's where we need to where we need to turn to see how we can galvanize the sort of the national identity or the national spirit through the Matildas, right? Rather than looking for the star players and then no one pays attention if they're injured and so forth.
I'm a huge fan, John, your point there, I'd love to watch the series, I don't have Disney. And I've done a fair bit of work on history on television. And what amazes me, considering how much money is in television, is how little research is done on the response to programs. We actually don't know about audience response to a lot of this material, and I think we should. And when I did my interviews with particularly younger athletes, they were all huge fans of social media. For the agency allowed them to construct stories of their lives. I think some of you talked about that yesterday. I'm currently teaching a unit at Macquarie on the global history of sport. Years ago, it used to be just on football and attracted a handful of men. Now it attracts about 100 students from across the university and a lot more women. And they tell me how they have been inspired by the Matildas. They continue to play soccer today. They might be studying business studies or whatever, but they're still playing soccer and they love it and they were inspired by the Matildas. Right? We don't actually have systematic data on that kind of information. And I think we should, actually. It would teach us a lot about our nation's relationship with sport and how we can inspire the young to continue in it.
Just one more point on that, I think that on kind of two opposite ends of the spectrum, if you look at what's happening in the United States right now with the NCAA, the college athletes and their name, image and likeness opportunities. So until a couple of years ago, they could not commercialize themselves at all. They could not gain any market value on their abilities there in college athletics, any college sport. And now they can be influencers, they can sell sponsorships, they can do all of this work. And what we're finding is that actually a lot of female athletes have been very successful, and it's not always directly tied to success. So there is a market for women athletes in that way. And then I think on the kind of on the other end of the spectrum, we talked yesterday a bit about the global, social impact of sporting clubs. And so without having a whole lot of success, we used Angel City as the example in the US again. Before even playing a game or signing their team, they had already had impact within their community and had garnered a following. So I think success is certainly helpful, but it's not a requirement. Did you have a question first?
Sorry, I missed part of the presentation. There's obviously things that are off the table here, which is great. Presentations I have heard sometimes are quite binary. I grew up in Balmain where Dawn Fraser ran Balmain, and she was the most, she had the most authority and privilege in that town because of who she was as a female athlete. This morning I took the international students that we have here to St Andrews College, and that's a college there which has a number of females who would have had some quite magnificent support throughout their upbringing. And I think sometimes we fall into a trap of just having everything lumped into binaries. A couple of days ago, I was at a public school, which was very, had quite a bit of disadvantage in there. And there are a lot of boys in there that had any support for sport. And then there are other ethnic communities who would prefer, I think, to have a doctor than a Sam Kerr as that. So just comment about looking at things in binaries.
Right, yeah, I think some of the elements that were present in the introductions we gave speak to the need for inclusion and how, when we say this is what we need in sport for girls or sport for women, well, actually there's a lot of diversity within that. How do we reach out to poorer communities, disadvantaged communities? How do we reach out to certain ethnic communities? We talked a bit yesterday about reaching girls from Muslim backgrounds and their specific needs, things like that. I'm gonna throw it back to the table here, the Sports Academy table. You had some questions?
We just have some comments, because we come from
It's so surprising.
the United States, that is a storytelling culture. And the way we frame community is through shared story experiences.
Thank you, sir.
So I found the question over here interesting about, can you have success? I think it goes beyond what we've been talking about as far as brand. It goes beyond brand. when you share the story has elements of your speech and your experience, but also what everyone around you says about you. And so there are two narratives, and those two narratives have an interplay. And then they also weave into the fabric of the community and the narrative that they would like to say about you. And that's where that I think that play of can we be successful? Yes, and we just have to create multiple narratives. And those narratives don't even have to be about sport. I mean, you would love the sport to be the primary narrative, but the other narratives create the fabric and create significance.
I really agree with that, and I think an ambassador company that does that really well is Nike. If you see the promotional clips of Nike, they don't sell, Nike, they sell Nike shoes, they sell Nike clothing. Their promotional clips are nothing about selling anything. They have images, they have storytelling that empower people from different cultural backgrounds, people with abilities or disabilities, people that have come and overcome adversities in life, and they touch on that emotional aspect that has such a huge impact, and the music, the images, the stories transform people's beliefs and perceptions about all sorts of different aspects in life. And I find this fascinating because even though Nike, are there to sell the products, throughout the messaging, they achieve a lot more than just, that alignment with the brand, just sales. So I think they're really innovative and transformative with what they're doing. Sorry.
No, that's fine. I totally agree with you. I think that when female athletes tell their story, we're actually gaining a peek into their souls. And I think the humanity, the human part of it, that aspect of it is what we're really connecting to, the emotional aspect of it. But it not only does that, it creates a pathway for them to explore sport. And I think that's powerful. I mean, our history is rich with storytelling. Before writing, we were telling stories, and that's how we learned. It was passed down from generation to generation. And I think we've kind of lost that. So I like the fact that you're capturing these narratives, because it's naturally how we're learning.
And I think it's the authenticity in the storytelling that touches people's hearts and creates that association.
Hi, so in Victoria, there was an advertising campaign that was trying to get more women exercising and involved in sport. They had a slogan, I can't remember what it was, but it was like, strong women, she can, something like that. And some of the research that was actually done from La Trobe, I think it's still in process of being published, maybe just recently published, was evaluating that campaign and how it went, and it ended up having a bit of a backflip influence in that women were seeing these women advertised on their TV, and it was diverse. There was lots of different people from different backgrounds, different body types, different sports. But it made them feel bad that they weren't doing it already, and it ended up having the wrong effect of what they were trying to achieve. And I think it comes, I guess my question for you is, storytelling is great, using social media is great, but at some point there's potentially a tipping point there where it becomes a negative experience and and an issue? How do we identify that? How do we work out what that is?
I can tell you why I think that happened. That's my big leap of faith and assumption based on years and years and years of engaging in this space and research. There's a point where the average Joe does not relate to an athlete. If you see, well, yeah, but there's the image that they put forward, and do I associate with that? Am I empowered by what I see? Can I achieve that, what they are putting forward? And if you feel that you can't achieve that, then it can have the opposite effect. That could be one of the, I'm not familiar with the campaign, but that could be one of the reasons why the average female has so many different barriers, whether it's time, kids, careers. Let's not forget how society is changing. There's a lot more single moms out there, myself included, and I know that it's a hard job having a full-time job, a career, full-time household, 2 little kids, school, extracurricular activities, and so forth and so forth. And all of a sudden you go, hang on a minute, how am I going to do all that? And I think this is where sometimes campaign need to be a little bit more informed by current norms and current challenges and issues to then have a bigger impact or to be relevant. That's my thoughts.
Yeah, I think aside from the fact that there's a lot of underlying problems around Nike and especially their work on women, in their work on women and girls and people in developing countries and all of that, I think there also is a certain backlash to the polished look and the everybody's perfect look. And now you see, I mean, everything's problematic when it's commercialized anyway, but like Dove's campaign for like real bodies, using, you know, real people, like not supermodels in their adverts. We're seeing a much stronger movement of that. I think that goes back a little bit to what we were saying earlier about this coming generation being a little bit more open about body styles and body image and body appearance. Yes. Okay.
But even though, because even people in my sport teams, like people wear like makeup and stuff to meets and stuff because they're like scared people are gonna like judge them, even though they're just doing their sport. I feel like that's pretty bad when it comes to like girls and women's in sport. You even see in the actual Women's World Cup, some women come with like false lashes and like filled in eyebrows, and it's like it's just kind of sad. I don't know how to say it, but yeah.
I actually had a question for Gwen, and it is, in discussing this, I was really curious, among your peers, and you just mentioned some of the makeup and things like that, but I'm curious, do you have discussions around playing sport, not playing sport? Do you have peers who don't play sport and talk about it? When I was a kid, there was this whole jock thing, you know, some people really didn't like the jocks and you didn't want to be a jock or did want to be a jock or something like that. But I'm just curious of how, if sport enters into your peer discussions at all.
Yeah, most of my friends are on my sport teams. And that's how I made friends in my new school.
All right, I'm gonna help you out a little bit here. I think what Martha's asking about is how important is sport in your peer group and how you talk to your friends. And for Gwen, so she just finished her first year at American school at the age of 12 and 13, and so she started school out in the Netherlands when we lived there, and then was in the UK and Scotland for 5 years. So transitioning into a new school, sport was a really critical part of making your friends, right? That was where most of your friends are on the field hockey team, and then some of you got together and joined the track team. Do you all talk about sport a lot, or do you, when you're on your phone for hours and hours in your room, playing games and stuff? I'm totally throwing you under the bus here. You're on the phone with them a lot. You have chats a lot. Like, if you could guess how much of the time you think, like 50%, 10%, do you talk about sport at all?
It's like, maybe like 20-30%, cause like we talk about, oh, this upcoming track meet or this like field hockey orientation or something like that, but it, like, we never go like into much detail or like, yay, I'll see you at practice or something like that.
Okay, thank you. I have a follow-up question. How important is it when you're playing on teams that your friends are on the team? Like, how much of that makes you want to play the sport, is having your friends there?
Cause like it is important because it makes you feel like, cause like if you're running events or something, then you like feel like you have someone that'll cheer you on. Because if you're like in it alone, or like when you're practicing, like you know that you have someone to practice with or talk about practice with, and like someone that you can relate to while being in that sport. It makes it more fun, yeah.
Got one more over here, James, back to your comment. I don't know how it is in Adelaide, but you can't go anywhere in Sydney without seeing Ellie Carpenter on a billboard or at the bus stop with the Visa campaign. So I think that and the ads that have Mary Fowler, Ellie, and some of the other players in there, maybe spread that a bit. But you're right, there's Sam, and without Sam, maybe we are getting to know the other players a little bit better.
Can I just jump into, just to raise the point about, who is telling the narrative, correct? And who's responsible? I mean, that quite a bit of, from the context of corporations doing that sort of, representation. I was just looking, just before coming today, looking through various community football club web pages around the inner west of Sydney. Not a single homepage of those community club actually has anything to do with the Women's World Cup. Right? And some clubs have hardly any images of girls or women who also play in those clubs in the leagues represented. And by contrast, there's one women's football team, club here, which is called Russell Lee Women's Football Club, which obviously, because it's a dedicated women's club, there's lots of pictures of the Matildas, what's happening, all the latest news around the World Cup, all featured on the main homepage. So again, you have clubs, community clubs that are mostly run by men. In some cases, migrant communities, older migrant communities, who pretty much replicate that sort of very masculine male sort of perspective of what it means to be, playing football, rather than even though those clubs actually have women and girl teams and so
on. Yes. First, your point about NIL, I thought was very good. What is really interesting is we assumed with NIL name, image, and likeness. You have to understand that there is, for all of American college sports, it was this British legacy of amateurism, which is very problematic in and of itself. It was insane. Basically, you had billion-dollar products, and you could not literally buy a player a hamburger. They had the impermissible benefits. So they were perfect amateurs producing billions of dollars for the Michigans and the Ohio States and so on. Now this has changed. By the way, again, back to by virtue of courts. This is very important. And absolutely, it's the O'Bannon case. It's exactly very similar to what you extolled so beautifully. No, it's just a different issue. What we learned from NIL, and I really appreciate when colleagues say things are really complicated. It's not one or the other. is that we assume that the only people who will make big bucks, and some of them do, are the football stars, clearly the quarterbacks. Right? Interestingly, by virtue of social media, the highest earning athlete at the University of Michigan, and we have some major athletes, is in fact a woman gymnast. In other words, so you have niches where indeed these women were not known, other than of course the three very well-known sports actually make a lot of money, which is fascinating. So that's number one. The other thing about your question about how much percent we talk about sports, and there I think is a huge gender difference. Were you a boy, I would say the answer is 98%. Okay, that's all they talk about. And in my book Sportista, I disclose that this is a fascinating story, which to men, sports is the default language. That's what you talk about, and not the sport you necessarily do, but the big hegemonic, in this case, American Big Four, the rest of the world, soccer and so on. And that's what you talk about. For women, even the sportista, the women experts who know more sports than I do, which is a lot, and they are still better, even they actually, for them, the role of the sports narrative and language has a different valence. It's not that they don't speak it perfectly, but they're more multilingual. The following story is absolutely unthinkable for anyone. I have a dear friend who came to visit for a weekend from Switzerland, and we had a wonderful weekend, and he leaves, and then my wife says, so isn't it sad that Michael broke up with his girlfriend, and I am kind of shuffling around, and my wife looks at me and said, don't tell me you don't know that. You guys spend an entire week and you don't know this. And I said, no, I didn't know this. Because we spent the Yankees, really go through all the sports, and that's not even enough for a weekend. So my wife actually learns about this. So what I'm saying here is that it has a different valence in their lives. Okay, there's nothing good or bad, it just is. And it has important ramifications that we, of course, discussed at this conference, for which we really need to thank John, really. And of course, Andy, it was a wonderful conference.
Can I just add to that before you respond? To take a positive note from this in the United States, there's a phenomenon that's pretty equivalent to Sam Kerr, and that's Caitlin Clark.
Yes.
And I don't know if you guys have followed basketball, college women's basketball, but Caitlin Clark has had so much media coverage and presence. She entered in the John Deere Pro-Am before the PGA tournament. They sold 10,000 extra tickets because Caitlin Clark, the basketball player, was playing golf in a Pro-Am for a men's golf tournament. So there is hope that the storytelling, the positive media coverage can have real impact. Now, it helps if you can shoot 3 pointers from 35, 40 feet, but it really is, something significant that's happening that has really taken off. One of the other star players of the NCAA tournament is from Ballarat, and I bet a lot of Australians don't know about her either.
So a lot of good.
Thinking of it.
So a lot of good stuff does happen in the United States.
This, just to wrap things up as we do, as we finish up this session, just in response to that, first of all, I think Tanya can speak a lot to that, the narrative that you're talking about, like the men are talking about this, women and girls are talking about this, and of course, your experience is not necessarily representative of everyone's experience, Gwen, but it's probably a good indication of the, a common experience. I would say around the NIL point, and you use the word niche, and I think that's fairly true. Gymnastics maybe is more than a niche sport, at least out with the United States. But I think it also speaks to that's the system, the sports that we have commodified and commercialized and organized and built up are based on men's experiences, and they're based around men's bodies. And I think had it been that women controlled which sports became popular from the roots of the Olympics, had Alice Mounier had her way in terms of women in the Olympics right from the get-go, gymnastics might be the World Cup of gymnastics. We might be gathered for that right now because it's clearly a very popular event, popular sport in the Olympics on the world stage. Why do we not see that commodified and commercialized in the same way that men's professional sport leagues are? I think that's a question of who's making the decisions, who's pushing the sport industry. But we're out of time, so I want to wrap up with one question answers. Okay, and this is, we're here at the World Cup. Who's going to win it? Not who do you want to win it? Who's going to win it? So these are predictions. All right, so I'm going to pass around. I'll start and I'm still blown away from the other night, and I'm going to just jump out on a leap here and say Japan. They were just nailing it the other day. Who do you think's gonna win?
Yeah, I was thinking about Japan too, because they like got like 4-0 with barely any passes, like it was insane. Yeah, probably Japan then, or at least they'll get like top 3.
I've got tickets to the semifinals in Brisbane, 20 something. Saturday, something like that. I can't remember the exact date. It's in my calendar. I'm not gonna miss it. And I really hope to see the Matildas with US, with the Matildas walking out that stadium with a trophy.
Go and put your bets on. I think it's Japan.
I have no idea, but I'm half German, and when it comes to soccer, I normally claim that German identity, and it's probably not going to work for me.
Smart.
Thanks very much. We've got a few minutes break, and then we're going to have a really fascinating question and answer sort of conversation with the two Andys. Andy Harper and Professor Markovitz with his book on women's football development in the USA and Europe.